This week's Grimm Fairy Tales: How 6 Men Got On in the World. There was once a man who understood all kinds of arts. He served in war and behaved well and bravely. But when the war was over, he received his dismissal and 3 farthings for his expenses on the way. "Stop," said he. "I shall not be content with this. If I can only meet with the right people, the king will yet have to give me all the treasure of the country." Then, full of anger, he went into the forest, and saw a man standing therein who had plucked up 6 trees as if they were blades of corn. He said to him, "Wilt thou be my servant and go with me?" "Yes," he answered, "but first I will take this little bundle of sticks home to my mother." And he took one of the trees and wrapped it round the 5 others, lifted the bundle on his back and carried it away. Then he returned and went with his master, who said, "We 2 ought to be able to get through the world very well." And when they had walked on for a short while, they found a huntsman who was kneeling, had shouldered his gun and was about to fire. The master said to him, "Huntsman, what art thou going to shoot?" He answered, 2 miles from here, a fly is sitting on the branch of an oak tree, and I want to shoot its left eye out." "Oh, come with me," said the man. "If we 3 are together, we certainly ought to be able to get on in the world." The huntsman was ready and went with him, and they came to 7 windmills whose sails were turning round with great speed, and yet no wind was blowing either on the right or the left, and no leaf was stirring. Then said the man, "I know not what is driving the windmills, not a breath of air is stirring." And he went onwards with his servants, and when they had walked 2 miles, they saw a man sitting on a tree who was shutting one nostril and blowing out of the other. "Good gracious, what are you doing up there?" He answered, 2 miles from here are 7 windmills. Look, I am blowing them till they turn round." "Oh, come with me," said the man. "If we 4 are together, we shall carry the whole world before us." Then the blower came down and went with him, and after a while they saw a man who was standing on one leg, and had taken off the other, and laid it beside him. Then the master said, "You have arranged things very comfortably to have a rest." "I'm a runner," he replied, "and to stop myself running far too fast, I have taken off one of my legs, for if I run with both, I go quicker than any bird can fly." "Ah, go with me. If we 5 are together, we shall carry the whole world before us." So he went with them, and it was not long before they met a man who wore a cap, but had put it quite on one ear. Then the master said to him, Gracefully, don't stick your cap on one ear. You look just like a tomfool." "I must not wear it otherwise," said he, "for if I set my hat straight, a terrible frost comes on, and all the birds in the air are frozen and drop dead to the ground." "Ah, come with me," said the master. "If we 6 are together, we can carry the whole world before us." Now the 6 came to a town where the king had proclaimed that whosoever ran a race with his daughter and won the victory should be her husband, but so whoever lost it must lose his head. Then the man presented himself and said, "I will, however, let my servant run for me." The king replied, "Then his life also must be staked, so that his head and thine are both set on the victory." When that was settled and made secure, the man buckled the other leg on the runner and said to him, "Now be nimble and help us to win." It was fixed that the one who was first to bring some water from a far distant well was to be the victor. The runner received a pitcher, and the king's daughter one too, and they began to run at the same time. But in an instant, when the king's daughter had got a very little way, the people who were looking on could see no more of the runner, and it was just as if the wind had whistled by. In a short time, he reached the well, filled his pitcher with water, and turned back. Halfway home, however, he was overcome with fatigue, and set his pitcher down, laid down himself, and fell asleep. He had, however, made a pillow of the horse's skull which was lying on the ground, in order that he might lie uncomfortably and soon wake up again. In the meantime, the king's daughter, who could also run very well, quite as well as any ordinary mortal can, had reached the well, and was hurrying back with her pitcher full of water. And when she saw the runner lying there asleep, she was glad and said, "My enemy is delivered over into my hands," emptied his pitcher, and ran on. And now all would have been lost if by good luck the huntsman had not been standing at the top of the castle, and had not seen everything with his sharp eyes. Then he said, "The king's daughter shall still not prevail against us." And he loaded his gun, and shot so cleverly that he shot the horse's skull away from under the runner's head without hurting him. Then the runner awoke, leapt up, and saw that his pitcher was empty, and that the king's daughter was already far in advance. He did not lose heart, however, but ran back to the well with his pitcher again, drew some water, and was at home again, 10 minutes before the king's daughter. "Behold," said he, "I have not bestirred myself till now. It did not deserve to be called running before." But it pained the king, and still more his daughter, that she could be carried off by a common disbanded soldier like that. So they took counsel with each other how to get rid of him and his companions. Then said the king to her, "I have thought of a way. Don't be afraid. They shall not come back again." And he said to them, "You shall now make merry together, and eat and drink." And he conducted them to a room which had a floor of iron, and the doors also were of iron, and the windows were guarded with iron bars. There was a table in the room covered with delicious food, and the king said to them, "Go in and enjoy yourselves." And when they were inside, he ordered the doors to be shut and bolted. Then he sent for the cook, and commanded him to make a fire under the room until the iron became red hot. This the cook did, and the 6 who were sitting at table began to feel quite warm, and they thought the heat was caused by the food. But as it became still greater, and they wanted to get out, and found that the doors and windows were bolted, they became aware that the king must have an evil intention, and wanted to suffocate them. "He shall not succeed, however," said the one with the cap. "I will cause a frost to come, before which the fire shall be ashamed and creep away." Then he put his cap on straight, and immediately there came such a frost that all heat disappeared, and the food on the dishes began to freeze. When an hour or 2 had passed by, the king believed that they had perished in the heat. He had the doors opened to behold them himself, but when the doors were opened, all 6 were standing there alive and well, and said that they should very much like to get out to warm themselves, for the very food was fast frozen to the dishes with the cold. Then, full of anger, the king went down to the cook, scolded him, and asked why he had not done what he had been ordered to do. But the cook replied, "There is heat enough there, just look yourself." Then the king saw that a fierce fire was burning under the iron room, and perceived that there was no getting the better of the 6 in this way. Again, the king considered how to get rid of his unpleasant guests, and caused their chief to be brought, and said, "If thou wilt take gold and renounce my daughter, thou shalt have as much as thou wilt." "Oh yes, Lord King," he answered. "Give me as much as my servant can carry, and I will not ask for your daughter." On this, the king was satisfied, and the other continued, "In 14 days I will come and fetch it." Thereupon he summoned together all the tailors in the whole kingdom, and they were to sit for 14 days and sew a sack. And when it was ready, the strong one who could tear up trees had to take it on his back and go with it to the king. Then said the king, "Who can that strong fellow be who is carrying a bundle of linen on his back that is as big as a house?" And he was alarmed and said, "What a lot of gold he can carry away." Then he commanded a ton of gold to be brought. It took 16 of his strongest men to carry it, but the strong one snatched it up in one hand, put it on his sack, and said, "Why don't you bring more at the same time? That hardly covers the bottom." Then little by little, the king caused all his treasure to be brought thither, and the strong one pushed it into the sack, and still the sack was not half full with it. "Bring more," cried he. "These few crumbs don't fill it." Then 7,000 carts with gold had to be gathered together in the whole kingdom, and the strong one thrust them and the oxen harnessed to them into his sack. "I will examine it no longer," said he, "but will just take what comes, so long as the sack is but full." When all that was inside, there was still room for a great deal more. Then he said, "I will just make an end of the thing. People do sometimes tie up a sack even when it is not full." So he took it on his back and went away with his comrades. When the king now saw how one single man was carrying away the entire wealth of the country, he became enraged and bade his horsemen mount and pursue the sixth, and order them to take the sack away from the strong one. 2 regiments speedily overtook the sixth and called out, "Your prisoners, put down the sack with the gold, or you will all be cut to pieces." "What say you?" cried the blower. "That we are prisoners? Rather than that should happen, all of you shall dance about in the air." And he closed one nostril, and with the other blew on the 2 regiments. Then they were driven away from each other, and carried into the blue sky over all the mountains, one here, the other there. One sergeant cried for mercy. He had 9 wounds, and was a brave fellow who did not deserve ill treatment. The blower stopped a little so that he came down without injury, and then the blower said to him, "Now go home to thy king, and tell him he had better send some more horsemen, and I will blow them all into the air." When the king was informed of this, he said, "Let the rascals go. They have the best of it." Then the 6 conveyed the riches home, divided it among them, and lived in content until their death. The 2 travelers. Hill and vale do not come together, but the children of men do, good and bad. In this way, a shoemaker and a tailor once met with each other in their travels. The tailor was a handsome little fellow, who was always merry and full of enjoyment. He saw the shoemaker coming towards him from the other side, and as he observed by his bag what kind of a trade he plied, he sang a little mocking song to him. "Sew me the seam, draw me the thread, spread it over with pitch, knock the nail on the head." The shoemaker, however, could not endure a joke. He pulled a face as if he had drunk vinegar, and made a gesture as if he were about to seize the tailor by the throat. But the little fellow began to laugh, reached him his bottle, and said, "No harm was meant. Take a drink, and swallow your anger down." The shoemaker took a very hearty drink, and the storm on his face began to clear away. He gave the bottle back to the tailor and said, "I spoke civilly to you. One speaks well after much drinking, but not after much thirst. Shall we travel together?" "All right," answered the tailor, "if only it suits you to go into a big town where there is no lack of work." "That is just where I want to go," answered the shoemaker. "In a small nest there is nothing to earn, and in the country people like to go barefoot." They traveled therefore onwards together, and always sat one foot before the other like a weasel in the snow. Both of them had had time enough, but little to bite and to break. When they reached a town, they went about and paid their respects to the tradesmen, and because the tailor looked so lively and merry, and had such pretty red cheeks, everyone gave him work willingly. And when luck was good, The master's daughter gave him a kiss beneath the porch as well. When he again fell in with the shoemaker, the tailor had always the most in his bundle. The ill-tempered shoemaker made a wry face and thought, "The greater the rascal, the more the luck." But the tailor began to laugh and to sing, and shared all he got with his comrade. If a couple of pence jingled in his pockets, he ordered good cheer, and thumped the table in his joy till the glasses danced, and it was lightly come, lightly go with him. When they had traveled for some time, they came to a great forest through which passed the road to the capital. 2 footpaths, however, led through it, one of which was a 7 days' journey, and the other only 2. But neither of the travelers knew which way was the short one. They seated themselves beneath an oak tree, and took counsel together how they should forecast, and for how many days they should provide themselves with bread. The shoemaker said, "One must look before one leaps. I will take with me bread for a week." "What?" said the tailor. "Drag bread for 7 days on one's back like a beast of burden, and not be able to look about? I shall trust in God, and not trouble myself about anything. The money I have in my pocket is as good in summer as in winter, but in hot weather bread gets dry and moldy into the bargain. Even my coat does not go as far as it might. Besides, why should we not find the right way? Bread for 2 days, and that's enough." Each therefore brought his own bread, and they tried their luck in the forest. It was as quiet there as in a church. No wind stirred, no brook murmured, no bird sang, and through the thickly leaved branches no sunbeam forced its way. The shoemaker spoke never a word. The heavy bread weighed down his back until the perspiration streamed down cross and gloomy face. The tailor, however, was quite merry. He jumped about, whistled on a leaf, or sang a song, and thought to himself, "God in heaven must be pleased to see me so happy." This lasted 2 days, but on the 3rd the forest would not come to an end, and the tailor had eaten up all his bread. So after all his heart sank down a yard deeper. In the meantime he did not lose courage, but relied on God and on his luck. And on the 3rd day he lay down in the evening hungry under a tree, and rose again next morning hungry still. So also passed the 4th day, and when the shoemaker seated himself on a fallen tree, and devoured his dinner, the tailor was only a looker-on. If he begged for a little piece of bread, the other laughed mockingly and said, "Thou hast always been so merry, now thou canst try for once what it is to be sad. The birds which sing too early in the morning are struck by the hawk in the evening." In short, he was pitiless, but on the 5th morning the poor tailor could no longer stand up, and was hardly able to utter one word for weakness. His cheeks were white, and his eyes red. Then the shoemaker said to him, "I will give thee a bit of bread today, but in return for it I will put out thy right eye." The unhappy tailor, who still wished to save his life, could not do it in any other way. He wept once more with both eyes, and then held them out, and the shoemaker, who had a heart of stone, put out his right eye with a sharp knife. The tailor called to remembrance what his mother had formerly said to him when he had been eating secretly in the pantry. "Eat what one can and suffer what one must." When he had consumed his dearly bought bread, he got on his legs again, forgot his misery, and comforted himself with the thought that he could always see enough with one eye. But on the 6th day, hunger made itself felt again, and gnawed him almost to the heart. In the evening he fell down by a tree, and on the 7th morning he could not raise himself up for faintness, and death was close at hand. Then said the shoemaker, "I will show mercy and give thee bread once more, but thou shalt not have it for nothing. I shall put out thy other eye for it." And now the tailor felt how thoughtless his life had been, prayed to God for forgiveness, and said, Do what thou wilt. I will bear what I must, but remember that our Lord God does not always look on passively, and that an hour will come when the evil deed which thou hast done to me, and which I have not deserved of thee, will be requited. When times were good with me, I shared what I had with thee. My trade is of that kind that each stitch must always be exactly like the other. If I no longer have my eyes and can sew no more, I must go a-begging. At any rate, do not leave me here alone when I am blind, or I shall die of hunger." The shoemaker, however, who had driven God out of his heart, took the knife and put out his left eye. Then he gave him a bit of bread to eat, held out a stick to him, and drew him on behind him. When the sun went down, they got out of the forest, and before them in the open country stood the gallows. Thither the shoemaker guided the blind tailor, and then left him alone and went his way. Weariness, pain, and hunger made the wretched man fall asleep, and he slept the whole night. When day dawned he awoke, but knew not where he lay. 2 poor sinners were hanging on the gallows, and a crow sat on the head of each of them. Then one of the men who had been hanged began to speak and said, "Brother, art thou awake?" "Yes, I am awake," answered the second. "Then I will tell thee something," said the first. "The dew which this night has fallen down over us from the gallows, give every one who washes himself with it his eyes again. If blind people did but know this, how many would regain their sight, who do not believe that to be possible?" When the tailor heard that, he took his pocket handkerchief, pressed it on the grass, and when it was moist with dew, washed the sockets of his eyes with it. Immediately was fulfilled what the man on the gallows had said, and a couple of healthy new eyes filled the sockets. It was not long before the tailor saw the sun rise behind the mountains. In the plain before him lay the great royal city with its magnificent gates and 100 towers, and the golden balls and crosses which were on the spires began to shine. He could distinguish every leaf on the trees, saw the birds which flew past, and the midges which danced in the air. He took a needle out of his pocket, and as he could thread it as well as ever he had done, his heart danced with delight. He threw himself on his knees, thanked God for the mercy he had shown him, and said his morning prayer. He did not forget also to pray for the poor sinners who were hanged there, swinging against each other in the wind like the pendulums of clocks. Then he took his bundle on his back, and soon forgot the pain of heart he had endured, and went on his way, singing and whistling. The first thing he met was a brown foal running about the fields at large. He caught it by the mane, and wanted to spring on it and ride into the town. The foal, however, begged to be set free. "I am still too young," it said. "Even a light tailor such as thou art would break my back in 2. Let me go till I have grown strong. A time may perhaps come when I may reward thee for it." "Run off," said the tailor. "I see thou art still a giddy thing." He gave it a touch with a switch over its back, whereupon it kicked up its hind legs for joy, leapt over hedges and ditches, and galloped away into the open country. But the little tailor had eaten nothing since the day before. "The sun-to-be sure fills my eyes," said he, "but the bread does not fill my mouth. The first thing that comes across me, and is even half edible, will have to suffer for it." In the meantime, a stork stepped solemnly over the meadow towards him. "Halt! Halt!" cried the tailor, and seized him by the leg. "I don't know if thou art good to eat or not, but my hunger leaves me no great choice. I must cut off thy head and roast thee." "Don't do that," replied the stork. "I am a sacred bird which brings mankind great profit, and no one does me an injury. Leave me my life, and I may do thee good in some other way." "Well, be off, cousin Longlegs," said the tailor. The stork rose up, let its long legs hang down, and flew gently away. "What's to be the end of this?" said the tailor to himself at last. "My hunger grows greater and greater, and my stomach more and more empty. Whatsoever comes in my way now is lost." At this moment he saw a couple of young ducks which were on a pond come swimming towards him. "You come just at the right moment," said he, and laid hold of one of them and was about to wring its neck. On this an old duck which was hidden among the reeds began to scream loudly and swam to him with open beak, and begged him urgently to spare her dear children. "Canst thou not imagine," said she, "how thy mother would mourn if any wanted to carry thee off and give thee thy finishing stroke?" "Only be quiet," said the good-tempered tailor. "Thou shalt keep thy children," and put the prisoner back into the water. When he turned around, he was standing in front of an old tree which was partly hollow, and saw some wild bees flying in and out of it. "There, I shall at once find the reward of my good deed," said the tailor. "The honey will refresh me." But the queen bee came out, threatened him, and said, "If thou touchest my people and destroyest my nest, our sting shall pierce thy skin like 10,000 red-hot needles. But if thou wilt leave us in peace and go thy way, we will do thee a service for it another time." The little tailor saw that here also nothing was to be done. "3 dishes empty and nothing on the 4th is a bad dinner." He dragged himself, therefore, with his starved-out stomach into the town, and as it was just striking 12, all was ready cooked for him in the inn, and he was able to sit down at once to dinner. When he was satisfied, he said, "Now I will get to work." He went round the town, sought a master, and soon found a good situation. As however he had thoroughly learnt his trade, it was not long before he became famous, and everyone wanted to have his new coat made by the little tailor, whose importance increased daily. "I can go no further in skill," said he, "and yet things improve every day." At last the king appointed him court tailor. But how things do happen in the world! On the very same day his former comrade, the shoemaker, also became court shoemaker. When the latter caught sight of the tailor, and saw that he had once more 2 healthy eyes, his conscience troubled him. "Before he takes revenge on me," thought he to himself, "I must dig a pit for him." He, however, who digs a pit for another, falls into it himself. In the evening, when work was over and it had grown dusk, he stole to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor is an arrogant fellow and has boasted that he will get the gold crown back again, which was lost in ancient times." "That would please me very much," said the king, and he caused the tailor to be brought before him next morning, and ordered him to get the crown back again, or to leave the town forever. "Ho, ho," thought the tailor, "a rogue gives more than he has got. If the surly king wants me to do what can be done by no one, I will not wait till morning, but will go out of the town at once, today." He packed up his bundle, therefore, but when he was without the gate, he could not help being sorry to give up his good fortune, and turned back on the town in which all good gone so well with him. He came to the pond, where he had made the acquaintance of the ducks. At that very moment the old one, whose young ones he had spared, was sitting there by the shore, pluming herself with her beak. She knew him again instantly, and asked why he was hanging his head so. "Thou wilt not be surprised when thou hearest what has befallen me," replied the tailor, and told her of his fate. "If that be all," said the duck, "we can help thee. The crown fell into the water and lies down below at the bottom. We will soon bring it up again for thee. In the meantime, just spread out thy handkerchief on the bank." She dived down with her 12 young ones, and in 5 minutes she was up again, and sat with the crown resting her wings, and 12 young ones were swimming round about, and had put their beaks under it, and were helping to carry it. They swam to the shore, and put the crown on the handkerchief. No one can imagine how magnificent the crown was. When the sun shone on it, it gleamed like 100,000 carbuncles. The tailor tied his handkerchief together by the four corners and carried it to the king, who was full of joy, and put a gold chain around the tailor's neck. When the shoemaker saw that one stroke had failed, he contrived a second and went to the king and said, "Lord King, the tailor has become insolent again. He boasts that he will copy and wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertains to it, loose or fast, inside and out." The king sent for the tailor and ordered him to copy and wax the whole of the royal palace, with everything that pertained to it, movable or immovable, within and without. And if he did not succeed in doing this, or if so much as one nail on the wall were wanting, he should be imprisoned for his whole life underground. The tailor thought, "It gets worse and worse. No one can endure that," and threw his bundle on his back and went forth. When he came to the hollow tree, he sat down and hung his head. The bees came flying out, and the queen bee asked him if he had a stiff neck, since he held his head so awry. "Alas, no," answered the tailor. "Something quite different weighs me down." And he told her what the king had demanded of him. The bees began to buzz and hum amongst themselves, and the queen bee said, "Just go home again, but come back tomorrow at this time, and bring a large sheet with you, and then all will be well." So he turned back again, but the bees flew to the royal palace, and straight into it through the open windows, crept round about into every corner and inspected everything most carefully. Then they hurried back and molded the palace in wax with such rapidity that anyone looking on would have thought it was growing before his eyes. By the evening all was ready, and when the tailor came next morning, the whole of the splendid building was there, and not one nail in the wall or tile of the roof was wanting, and it was delicate withal, and white as snow, and smelt sweet as honey. The tailor wrapped it carefully in his cloth and took it to the king, who could not admire it enough, placed it in his largest hall, and in return for it presented the tailor with a large stone house. The shoemaker, however, did not give up, but went for the third time to the king and said, "Lord King, it has come to the tailor's ears that no water will spring up in thy courtyard of the castle, and he has boasted that it shall rise up in the midst of the courtyard to a man's height and be clear as crystal." Then the king ordered the tailor to be brought before him and said, "If a stream of water does not rise in my courtyard by tomorrow, as thou hast promised, the executioner shall in that very place make thee shorter by the head." The poor tailor did not take long to think about it, but hurried out to the gate, and because this time it was a matter of life and death to him, tears rolled down his face. Whilst he was thus going forth full of sorrow, the foal to which he had formerly given its liberty, and which had now become a beautiful chestnut horse, came leaping towards him. "The time has come," it said to the tailor, "when I can repay thee for thy good deed. I know already what is needful to thee, but thou shalt soon have help. Get on me, my back can carry two such as thou." The tailor's courage came back to him. He jumped up in one bound, and the horse went full speed into the town, and right up to the courtyard of the castle. It galloped as quickly as lightning, thrice round it, and at the third time it fell violently down. At the same instant, however, there was a terrific clap of thunder. A fragment of earth in the middle of the courtyard sprang like a cannonball into the air, and over the castle, and directly after it, a jet of water rose as high as a man on horseback, and the water was as pure as crystal, and the sunbeams began to dance on it. When the king saw that, he arose in amazement, and went and embraced the tailor in the sight of all men. But good fortune did not last long. The king had daughters in plenty, one still prettier than the other, but he had no son. So the malicious shoemaker betook himself for the fourth time to the king, and said, "Lord King, the tailor has not given up his arrogance. He has now boasted that if he liked, he could cause a son to be brought to the Lord King through the air." The king commanded the tailor to be summoned and said, "If thou causest a son to be brought to me within 9 days, thou shalt have my eldest daughter to wife." "The reward is indeed great," thought the little tailor. "One would willingly do something for it, but the cherries grow too high for me. If I climb for them, the bough will break beneath me, and I shall fall." He went home, seated himself cross-legged on his work table, and thought over what was to be done. "It can't be managed," cried he at last. "I will go away. After all, I can't live in peace here." He tied up his bundle and hurried away to the gate. When he got to the meadow, he perceived his old friend the stork, who was walking backwards and forwards like a philosopher. Sometimes he stood still, took a frog into close consideration, and at length swallowed it down. The stork came to him and greeted him. "I see," he began, "that thou hast thy pack on thy back. Why art thou leaving the town?" The tailor told him what the king had required of him, and how he could not perform it, and lamented his misfortune. "Don't let thy hair grow gray about that," said the stork. "I will help thee out of thy difficulty. For a long time now I have carried the children in swaddling cloths into the town. So for once in a way I can fetch a little prince out of the well. Go home and be easy. In 9 days from this time repair to the royal palace, and there will I come." The little tailor went home, and at the appointed time was at the castle. It was not long before the stork came flying thither and tapped at the window. The tailor opened it, and Cousin Longlegs came carefully in, and walked with solemn steps over the smooth marble pavement. He had moreover a baby in his beak that was as lovely as an angel, and stretched out its little hands to the queen. The stork laid it in her lap, and she caressed it and kissed it, and was beside herself with delight. Before the stork flew away, he took his traveling bag off his back and handed it over to the queen. In it there were little paper parcels with colored sweetmeats, and they were divided amongst the little princesses. The eldest, however, had none of them, but got the merry tailor for a husband. "It seems to me," said he, "just as if I had won the highest prize. My mother was right after all. She always said that whosoever trusts in God and only has good luck can never fail." The shoemaker had to make the shoes in which the little tailor danced at the wedding festival, after which he was commanded to quit the town forever. The road to the forest led him to the gallows. Worn out with anger, rage, and the heat of the day, he threw himself down. When he had closed his eyes and was about to sleep, the 2 crows flew down from the heads of the men who were hanging there, and pecked his eyes out. In his madness he ran into the forest, and must have died there of hunger, for no one has ever either seen him again or heard of him. The ear of corn. In former times, when God himself still walked the earth, the fruitfulness of the soil was much greater than it is now, when the ears of corn did not bear 50 or 60, but 400 or 500-fold. Then the corn grew from the bottom to the very top of the stalk, and according to the length of the stalk was the length of the ear. Men, however, are so made that when they are too well off, they no longer value the blessings which come from God, but grow indifferent and careless. One day a woman was passing by a cornfield when her little child, who was running beside her, fell into a puddle and dirtied her frock. On this the mother tore up a handful of the beautiful ears of corn and cleaned the frock with them. When the Lord, who just then came by, saw that, he was angry and said, Henceforth shall the stalks of corn bear no more ears. Men are no longer worthy of heavenly gifts." The bystanders who heard this were terrified, and fell on their knees and prayed that he would still leave something on the stalks, even if the people were undeserving of it, for the sake of the innocent birds which would otherwise have to starve. The Lord, who foresaw their suffering, had pity on them, and granted the request, so the ears were left as they now grow. The Ungrateful Son. A man and his wife were once sitting by the door of their house, and they had a roasted chicken set before them, and were about to eat it together. Then the man saw that his aged father was coming, and hastily took the chicken and hid it, for he would not permit him to have any of it. The old man came, took a drink, and went away. Now the son wanted to put the roasted chicken on the table again, but when he took it up, it had become a great toad, which jumped into his face and sat there and never went away again. And if anyone wanted to take it off, it looked venomously at him, as if it would jump on his face, so that no one would venture to touch it. And the ungrateful son was forced to feed the toad every day, or else it fed itself on his face, and thus he went about the world without knowing rest. The Old Man and His Grandson. There was once a very old man, whose eyes had become dim, his ears dull of hearing, his knees trembled, and when he sat at table he could hardly hold the spoon, and spilt the broth upon the tablecloth, or let it run out of his mouth. His son and his son's wife were disgusted at this, so the old grandfather at last had to sit in the corner behind the stove, and they gave him his food in an earthenware bowl, and not even enough of it, and he used to look towards the table with his eyes full of tears. Once, too, his trembling hands could not hold the bowl, and it fell to the ground and broke. The young wife scolded him, but he said nothing and only sighed. Then they bought him a wooden bowl for a few halfpence, out of which he had to eat. They were once sitting thus, when the little grandson of 4 years old began to gather together some bits of wood upon the ground. "What are you doing there?" asked the father. "I am making a little trough," answered the child, "for father and mother to eat out of when I am big." The man and his wife looked at each other for a while, and presently began to cry. Then they took the old grandfather to the table, and henceforth always let him eat with them, and likewise said nothing if he did spill a little of anything. The Bittern and the Hoepoo. "Where do you like best to be fed your flocks?" said a man to an old cowherd.
"Here, sir, where the grass is neither too rich nor too poor, or else it is no use."
"Why not?" asked the man.
"Do you hear that melancholy cry from the meadow there?"
answered the sheepherd.
"That is the Bittern. He was once a shepherd, and so was the Hoepoo also. I will tell you the story. The Bittern pastured his flocks on rich green meadows, where flowers grew in abundance, so his cows became wild and unmanageable. The Hoepoo drove his cattle on to high barren hills, where the wind plays with the sand, and his cows became thin, and got no strength. When it was evening, and the shepherds wanted to drive their cows homewards, the Bittern could not get his together again. They were too high-spirited, and ran away from him. He called, 'Come, cows, come!' But it was of no use. They took no notice of his calling. The Hoepoo, however, could not even get his cows up on their legs, so faint and weak had they become. 'Up, up, up!' screamed he, but it was in vain. They remained lying on the sand. That is the way when one has no moderation. And to this day, though they have no flocks now to watch, The Bitters cry, "Come, cows, come!" And the Hoepoo, "Up, up, up!"
The Three Languages. An aged count once lived in Switzerland who had an only son, but he was stupid and could learn nothing. Then said the father, "Hark thee, my son, I can get nothing into thy head. Let me try as I will. Thou must go from hence. I will give thee into the care of a celebrated master, who shall see what he can do with thee." The youth was sent into a strange town and remained a whole year with the master. At the end of this time, he came home again, and his father asked, "Now, my son, what hast thou learnt?" "Father, I have learnt what the dogs say when they bark." "Lord have mercy on us," cried the father. "Is that all thou hast learnt? I will send thee into another town to another master." The youth was taken thither, and stayed a year with this master likewise. When he came back, the father again asked, "My son, what hast thou learnt?" He answered, "Father, I have learnt what the birds say." Then the father fell into a rage and said, "Oh, thou lost man! Thou hast spent the precious time and learnt nothing. Art thou not ashamed to appear before mine eyes? I will send thee to a third master, but if thou learnest nothing this time also, I will no longer be thy father." The youth remained a whole year with the third master also, and when he came home again, and his father inquired, "My son, what hast thou learnt?" He answered, "Dear father, I have this year learnt what the frogs croak." Then the father fell into the most furious anger, sprang up, called his people thither, and said, "This man is no longer my son. I drive him forth and command you to take him out into the forest and kill him." They took him forth, but when they should have killed him, they could not do it for pity, and let him go. And they cut the eyes and the tongue out of a deer, that they might carry them to the old man as a token. The youth wandered on, and after some time came to a fortress where he begged for a night's lodging.
"Yes,"
said the lord of the castle,
"if thou wilt pass the night down there in the old tower, go thither. But I warn thee, it is the peril of thy life, for it is full of wild dogs, which bark and howl without stopping, and at certain hours a man has to be given to them, whom they at once devour."
The whole district was in sorrow and dismay because of them, and yet no one could do anything to stop this. The youth, however, was without fear and said, "Just let me go down to the barking dogs, and give me something that I can throw to them. They will do nothing to harm me." As he himself would have it so, they gave him some food for the wild animals, and led him down to the tower. When he went inside, the dogs did not bark at him, but wagged their tails quite amicably around him, ate what he set before them, and did not hurt one hair of his head. Next morning, to the astonishment of everyone, he came out again safe and unharmed, and said to the lord of the castle, "The dogs have revealed to me, in their own language, why they dwell there and bring evil on the land. They are bewitched, and are obliged to watch over a great treasure which is below in the tower, and they can have no rest until it is taken away. And I have likewise learnt from their discourse how that is to be done." Then all who heard this rejoiced, and the lord of the castle said he would adopt him as a son if he accomplished it successfully. He went down again, and as he knew what he had to do, he did it thoroughly, and brought a chest full of gold out with him. The howling of the wild dogs was henceforth heard no more. They had disappeared, and the country was freed from the trouble. After some time, he took it into his head that he would travel to Rome. On the way, he passed by a marsh, in which a number of frogs were sitting, croaking. He listened to them, and when he became aware of what they were saying, he grew very thoughtful and sad. At last he arrived in Rome, where the Pope had just died, and there was great difficulty as to whom they should appoint as his successor. They at length agreed that the person should be chosen as Pope, who should be distinguished by some divine and miraculous token. And just as that was decided on, the young count entered into the church, and suddenly 2 snow-white doves flew on his shoulders, and remained sitting there. The ecclesiastics recognized therein the token from above, and asked him on the spot if he would be Pope. He was undecided, and knew not if he were worthy of this. But for the doves counseled him to do it, and at length he said yes. Then was he anointed and consecrated, and thus was fulfilled what he had heard from the frogs on his way, which had so affected him that he was to be His Holiness the Pope. Then he had to sing a mass, and did not know one word of it, but the 2 doves sat continually on his shoulders, and said it all in his ear.